Hey everyone, it's Austin in the middle, and I hope you're having a great day so far today. I have a film review that coincides with a previous review I did before this when I discussed Agent Cody Banks. I said at some point I'll be getting to the sequel, but I went ahead and watched it, and that will be the point of review today. Agent Cody Banks 2, starring Frankie Muniz, who is the titular character of this series, Hannah Spirit, who you see on the cover here but is not mentioned whatsoever in the credits, and Anthony Anderson, who ends up playing Cody Banks' new handler in this film. I have to say, I have been disappointed with this movie ever since it came out, and I guess I'll start there. The first film, when it came out in 2003, I fell in love with it. I already shared my memory with my mom on my birthday. This movie came out on my birthday when I was 9 years old. And she took me out of school early to see this film. And me and her had a blast with it, and we talked about it on the ride home. And eventually I ended up getting a physical copy, and this is my childhood copy here, that I've taken care of forever. And I still maintain that this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I just love this movie. It's so rewatchable. It holds up well as the perfect teenage fantasy film, in my opinion. And then we get to something like this, which comes out only a year later in 2004. And I can't help but to just see the error in judgment MGM made rushing this film out. The same producers are behind it. Madonna's still the main producer. They got a new director this time, Kevin Allen. But since it was so rushed, they couldn't get everybody back from the previous cast. So there's some people missing from the first movie, like Ronica, who was played by the gorgeous Angie Harmon. Did not make an appearance in this film. And the girl who played Natalie, Hilary Duff, who was one of the starring roles in the film, did not come back for this. So, looking at what happened with this movie, seeing that it had the identical budget as the previous film, and it only grossed $2 million profit at the box office, on top of making back their budget, shows that this movie killed the franchise, to say the least. Or maybe the first movie was just a fluke, and they made a wrong judgment and error by rushing this film out. I couldn't tell you, but it's a shame that Agent Cody Banks never had at least 3 films in its franchise. It's really no rhyme or reason to why that never happened, or MGM never thought to take it straight to video. But judging by the recent watch of this film, I can kind of see why. Now, what made the original Agent Cody Banks timeless, in my opinion, is, like I said, it captures that teenage fantasy perfect. It creates a couple of characters that you get invested into. You see the trials and tribulations that Cody has to go through on his daily mundane life, but he has a larger-than-life alter ego that he has to hide from his family and hide from his peers that he longs to get to at some point. And he's finally given that opportunity, and because he's a teenager, because he's young, he makes mistakes. He ends up falling for a girl on his assignment and does wrong by everyone that he's entrusted with and has to do right and save the day at the end. It's a whole feeling story. Here, Agent Cody Banks 2 is not that whatsoever. It's seriously a cash grab sequel that failed miserably, because Agent Cody Banks 2, in a nutshell, is a pure rush job of a film. There's many movies in the past, we have seen this with in different franchises of different genres of film. One example could be Halloween 5, the follow-up to Halloween 4 and the Michael Myers franchise. That movie was rushed a year to the date almost after Halloween 4 came out, and we saw what train wreck that caused in that franchise moving forward for pretty much ever. Except here, this movie killed the franchise because I feel like it was a different time in the mid-2000s, especially for kids' movies. A lot of mass media marketing were put into films, and when films were successful, the sequel films often had product placement in there to advertise to kids. And this, I would just say, is a film that mustered up advertisers to put product placement in the film use their products to kind of intertwine with the plot a little bit. And I'm guarantee you, of that $2 million profit that this film made, all that money went back to the advertisers that sponsored the film, and the company inevitably lost money here. So, yeah, Agent Cody Banks 2 is a big old miss in my opinion. Now, I guess we'll run over the story real quick of what you'll expect with this film if you haven't seen it. I'm not going to go over too many spoilers. I'm going to keep it very surface level and not spoil it whatsoever. So, the movie starts off with this summer camp that Cody Banks is attending, and you see this montage of him going through the woods in camouflage. And this is the summer camp that was implied in the first film to be where Cody Banks received CIA training, and that's how he became part of the children's CIA training program led by Keith David, who makes a return here as the overseeing CIA agent who runs the program here. And Cody's at camp, but his parents are coming to visit on Parents' Day, and they have all these camp, high-tech gadgets and rockets and all this stuff around the camp, and cool little four-wheelers driving around. Kids are having fun with all this spy equipment, and they have to hide it immediately because the parents suddenly show up. And Cody has to show his family around his camp, but there's something wrong when Cody gets this inkling that something's wrong when the runner of the camp, who's played by, what's his name? I forget his name. He's not even on the credits here. It's not really important, but this person who runs the camp gives like a suspicious speech, and then something goes really wrong at the camp later that day when the parents leave, and Cody is now thrust into this secret mission again, like he was in the first movie. And Keith David has recruited him to send him over to London because this camp runner supposedly is working on this top secret project with this evil guy over in London that essentially revolve around chips being installed into people's brains, and they can like mind control people and make them do whatever. And Cody now has to go attend this private school over in England because that's where the evil guy is, and his mission is to essentially find out where they're making these chips and figure out how to stop the bad guys. Now, when he goes overseas, he gets a new handler. Instead of Veronica in this film, I kind of already brought it up, he gets a new handler played by Anthony Anderson. And Anthony Anderson is really over the top in this film, but nonetheless, he's a lot more comedic, I should say, than Veronica. But he gets, a new handler, and he goes to the private school, and he has to pretend to be in this orchestra of sorts to blend in with the academy and stuff. And there he meets this girl named Emily, who's played by Hannah Spirit, who I think before this film was known for being in a girl band. So she's not really a great actress. But he befriends this girl named Emily and kind of has this crush on her. So we're going back on the retread that he went in the previous movie with Natalie, and you saw that genuine connection blossoming there. And it's kind of forced here, but it doesn't really work the same way that the previous film did. But anyway, he befriends Emily, and he starts to do his thing. He has to spy, break into rooms. He meets some other CIA inventors that happen to be over there to help out with his operation. And this film does introduce more gadgets than we saw in the previous film. And what I mean by that is there's more gadgets, but they're also more creative. Like, there's killer Beanie Babies, there's exploding Mentos, there's a video now that can turn into a projector. Yeah. And then they pretty much go from this point on, when he gets all these gadgets and stuff, that he's going to have to try to blend in this time. It's not going to be as easy as his last mission. He's going to have to use these gadgets to kind of help him stay under the radar, because these bad guys have CIA experience and they know what to look for, which I thought was a cool added layer. But there's a plot reveal involving Emily, and we learn something about her character, and Cody goes through some trials and tribulations again dealing with his mission. Doesn't really have to overcome adversity like the first film whatsoever, but he ends up managing to save the day, and he ends up back home, and we find out what happens with him. And that's essentially this movie in a nutshell. Like I said, I'm going to keep it very surface level. I want you to go in there and just take the movie as is, but I also want to give you enough of what to expect with it. Now, Agent Cody Banks 2, y'all. I think this movie in a couple of ways is a big old piece of shit. And I'll get down to the first thing I hate about this movie. This is so in-your-face advertising. Like with the Mentos being turned into explosives, right? Or the Killer Beanie Babies being like CIA droids almost. Or the video now becoming a projector, right? This stuff is obviously forced in there. And I went back because I was curious to see if any of these companies were actually advertising the film. And sure enough, Video Now had a famous commercial that I remembered after watching it that would play around this time this movie came out, pushing the Video Now starter set that came with like a making of Agent Cody Banks 2. Yeah, it's very obvious in this film who the sponsors of it were. Let's just put it that way. And it's very in your face. Now, the offset to that is kind of a positive, right? You have these items like Video Nows, Mentos, and Beanie Babies kind of making a fun appearance as CIA weapons. And I think that was kind of creative. But I also learned something, and I think that this possibly has an attribution to why this film made such a change to the gadgetry as opposed to the first film. I was watching a Ebert and Roper review of the first movie, and they said that they liked the movie, but they thought it was inferior to films like Spy Kids and Spy Kids 2. And part of the criticisms were that they thought that the gadgetry was, more unique. There was more artistic flair with those films. They were more creative. And I feel like the producers and the team behind making this movie, the sequel here at least, that's what I'm talking about, took the criticisms of people like Ebert and Roper a little too seriously. And yeah, the first movie, it had typical 2000s gadgets. There was really nothing creative. They were just really freaking cool. But you could see the inspiration from Spy Kids that they took here with like gadgets that blend in with their surroundings. Now, that's also another catch-all with it. I do like that added layer that Cody has to use these gadgets to blend in. But then again, it's just so in your face with the advertising that it gets kind of old. And I said it earlier, the film only made $2 million. And I guarantee you, the profit that was made went straight to those companies that sponsored the making of this movie. And since the studio most likely lost money, that's why we never got a third installment. I'll stand by that. But another thing I really dislike about this movie is the acting is noticeably more cringe than before. Anthony Anderson, I don't really have animosity to the guy. He was in a lot of early 2000s comedy movies. And watching another Ebert and Roper review of this film, they mentioned that Anthony Anderson needs to try to graduate out of these dumb comedy movies because it just doesn't work for his career. And I will agree. He was in that movie Kangaroo Jack, and that movie was absolute dog shit. And then you have his appearance here, and he's just played up like a very loud, obnoxious person. Yeah, I know a lot of people criticize Ronica in the previous movie because she's over-sexualized and kind of weird. But here, this guy's just a freaking idiot, and Anthony Anderson definitely plays the ham up with him and overacts, and it's just, he's really loud for no reason. It's hard to watch in certain scenes when he's in because he's just so over the top. He feels cartoonish, and I think that kind of detracts from the enjoyability of the film. But on top of that, Hannah Spirit, who plays this Emily girl, her acting is atrocious. People want to hate on Hilary Duff. Yeah, like I said in the previous video, I grew up with her acting, so I'm used to it. I've never seen her in anything else other than this movie, and she sucks the soul out of every scene she's in. She really does. And the whole angle with her character in the movie, it's so forced in there, and it detracts from this love interest angle that Cody has with her. It feels like a big waste of time, especially by the end when you figure out what happens. Nothing becomes of that. And this is supposed to be a sequel to essentially a perfect teenage fantasy film. We're supposed to have another teenage fantasy for teenagers to plug themselves into, and you give them that? Okay. And the comedy in this movie, I think I need to highlight. It's very more in-your-face slapstick humor than the previous film was. The previous film had some adult humor to it. I think that was majority of the humor in that film. And I think that's why it lands for me today, more so than it did when I was a kid, because I see what the writers were trying to do there. But here, you have Anthony Anderson being a cook, and he's spilling stuff, and there's food fights randomly in this cafeteria of sorts, or eating room, and then you have him just acting like a buffoon the whole movie. It's just really ridiculous. It feels more in tune with movies like Baby Geniuses than Agent Cody Banks. Another negative I have with it. This movie has the same budget as the first film here. Supposedly, according to the internet, you could have fooled me. You could have fooled me here because this movie looks cheap. I know that they actually went overseas and they filmed in the streets of London. They did some action sequences that looked fairly good for the most part. More like a Jason Bourne movie than a James Bond ripoff, but still. The setting looked good, but when you get to the set pieces, they look considerably cheaper than what we saw in previous movies. Now, I don't have an issue so much with the private school that Cody goes to in this movie, but most of the film is spent at this basic-looking campsite where you only see a few shots in certain angles of the camp. You get this traveling CIA bunker that goes around the movie. There's a hideout in the school he goes to. You see the orchestra room, the eating room, and the lobby of it. Everything else is shot outside, right? And the outside parts of the movie are great, but the inside parts look considerably cheap. And it does not help when you have the look of the film. I'm not trying to knock Kevin Allen here, but Kevin Allen did not bring that flair that Harold Zwart did to the first movie. This feels a lot more standard. The color hues, it's a little too red on my screen when I watch this movie. I had to adjust my TV color to make this film look at least somewhat watchable. And that's not a good thing. It's a little too red. You'll see what I'm talking about if you've seen this movie. It's very sunburst. It has that aura to it. And I don't like it when movies take a certain color for no reason to it. The tinting feels off in the editing. And the writing. The writing of this film is a bit basic, like the previous movie, but what made the previous movie more passable was the direction they took with Cody Banks. Now, Cody Banks here feels more like Malcolm Wilkerson from Malcolm in the Middle than he does Cody Banks. And I think the writers also heard some other criticisms that I found online, saying that that critics like Malcolm's character more than Cody Banks. So I guess they thought that to fix the problem with Frankie Muniz was to make him a character that was liked already, instead of trying to make him like Cody Banks in this movie. And Cody comes off more whiny, he comes off more mean, more pompous, more arrogant, and he doesn't have, like I said, he doesn't have that character moment where he has to go through obstacles to save the day. And if it is there, it's very forced in and shoehorned, and it's not believable, right? He doesn't feel like he does in the first film, right? I totally understand the argument. You know, he grew more confident. This was his first mission. Now he's on a second mission. Now he feels more on top, but still, you go through this whole rigmarole of trying to force him going over being awkward around girls again, him going through the whole rigmarole of, losing at parts of the mission and feeling bad and having to come back from, being down. But he doesn't get that level of shame that he does in the first movie. And I think that, like I said, despite the basic script, you feel emotional empathy with Cody in the film. And that's why the simple script works with his character, because you can feel that emotion. Here, you don't feel anything. It's lazy. It's lazy to the core. And I'll say this now. This film has not aged well at all. It has not aged well. I know some people out there say that this is one of their favorite movies ever. You know what? Good for you. I love the first film. I like this movie, and I'll get into some reasons why I like it in just a sec. But this does not hold a candle to the first movie, and I don't care what people say. Now, what I do like about the movie are the stunt sequences that we see in London throughout this movie. Those are pretty well done. They feel more like a Jason Bourne movie, but hey, they actually had Frankie Muniz doing some stunt work mildly. He had a stunt double like the first movie, but yeah, he's showing off that he has CIA training, and it looks cool. It's visually stunning when those scenes are present. And like I said already, I like the locations. The locations seem believable like the first film. The private school, London Academy, looks cool. It looks like something I would imagine in my brain. It has a cool setting to it, but the look of the movie just kind of ruins it. But I will give it that. It has a good setting to it. And honestly, I like the elements of the camp. When we do get elements of the camp was mentioned in the previous film, and it does add to that layer of Cody's character, where we see that he's diligent in his training, and he loves going to this camp, and loves the CIA, and he wants to, maintain his alter ego. And I think that feeds into Cody Banks and gives some background when it is there in the movie. I will say that there are things that kind of build from that. I do like to revisit that. And Keith David comes back again, and they kind of do him dirty with the script, but he's still great nonetheless. He's never bad in anything he's in, and I'll stand by that statement as long as I live. He was great in this. And, and I already talked about the gadgets beforehand as a compliment. I thought that was a cool change up, but it has its give and takes. But yeah, all in all, Agent Cody Banks 2, it's a advertisement movie sponsored by Mentos, Beanie Babies, and Video Now. It's dated itself because of the Video Now reference and the pushing of that. Beanie Babies also dated. And the Mentos thing might be the most iconic thing you could take from this movie, with some fun supporting characters here and there. I didn't mention them, like the scientist guy that creates the Mentos. He's kind of fun, and some fun action sequences, fun little settings here. But for the most part, this movie just falls flat. It's nowhere near as iconic as the first film. Nowhere near. This is a shell of what the first film is, in my opinion. It's a shame that we never got a franchise, third installment. But seeing when we got here, this killed the Agent Cody Banks franchise. And honestly, I think this movie probably killed Frankie Muniz's childhood acting career. By the time he filmed this movie, I think he was 19 years old. Yeah, he looks a lot younger than he is in these films around this time. He was already getting up there, his voice is getting deeper, he's getting a little bit taller, he's kind of phasing out of that childhood acting role. But this film, I will dare say, when you go on IMDb and look at his filmography from this point onward in his career, he wrapped up Malcolm in the Middle 2 years later. He did Racing Stripes as a voice acting role, and he pretty much fizzled out by the late 2000s. And he was in a bunch of just cameo roles and just a bunch of hokey shit movies until about 2017, where he made a decent horror thriller, and then he retired acting and became a NASCAR driver. It's sad, but it's the truth. And I hate to see that his film career went down the tubes after this movie, but it bombed, right? And it hasn't aged well, and I don't think it really looks good on his legacy as much as the first film does. But I will say, as a whole for this franchise, this kind of does act like a duology of sorts. Very lopsided, with the first film being essentially perfect, and the second film being really flawed. But I would recommend both of these if you haven't seen them before. If I had to rate the second movie from a 0 to 5 star basis, honestly, it's a very middling movie. It's not really rewatchable. I only watch this whenever I'm feeling nostalgic, morbid curiosity about it. I'd probably give this like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's okay. I've seen worse, but it's a slap in the face to the first movie, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Agent Cody Banks 2. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.